Hi, I'm Jeff, lead pastor of Northview Community Church in Abbotsford, British Columbia. And this podcast is where I get a chance to interview people about things that I'm interested in and talk about whatever I want to talk about.
Hello again. I am Levi, the producer. Welcome back to another conversation before a conversation with Jeff Bucknam. Jeff, how you doing?
I am doing well. And you?
I am also doing well. Do you love Fridays?
I do. We're here on a Friday, and being a pastor has been a little bit weird here because Saturday and Sunday are kind of like the height of your work during the week, and so that's made Friday a little bit different. But at the same time, I don't know. So many years of Fridays have seeped into my system that I cannot get over the idea that Friday is the best day.
Is Monday normally your primary day off?
Monday's my day off, yeah.
Okay.
I usually take that, which is odd, too, because everybody's going back to work and all that, and they're very sad, and I'm like, this is great.
Rest day.
Tuesday is my Monday, and we have all our meetings on Tuesday morning, and everybody always wonders, why is he such in a bad mood on Tuesday morning? Because you're on a bad mood on a Monday morning, but I don't get to have that on Tuesday, just because I have to meet with, it's also because I have to meet with people, because you know what? Meetings are the worst.
Too much Ezra on a Monday.
Yeah, like staff meetings are hard to maintain my attention in.
As a staff member, I understand why you say that.
That's right.
So there's this video going around.
That's one thing I won't miss, by the way. So anyway, go ahead.
There's this video going around for this new kind of website in its testing phase called Dominion Dating. And it's basically pitched as a dating website for people who are tired of really strong feminism and really weak men on other dating sites.
Strong men.
Yes.
Love it. A lot of chainsaws.
Well, some chainsaws, some very refined-looking, academic-looking men, too. So they've got some variety to choose from.
So it's not gone out yet, or you can actually sign up now.
Oh, you can sign up. They've got different levels of signing up.
If you are looking for either a man who is going to kill a bear, skin it and put that rug in front of a fireplace up in the woods in his cabin, or a man who's going to talk about the ethics of killing a bear, putting it up in his cabin, and whether he would ever buy a cabin, this is your site. It
should be noted that this is not a site you can actually use yet, but you can sign up at different levels of membership.
Really? What are the levels? Do you know?
I would have to look it up, but basically the more money you pledge up front, you can refer memberships to other people.
The more intellectual man you get?
Yeah.
The lower level is just the guy who looks like the Duck Dynasty dudes.
And then you get into real academic refinement.
Yeah, totally. $200 a month gets you ability to look at this guy.
At this point, they have no real endorsements.
No.
They have 2 endorsements up there, which at the end of them say not a real endorsement.
No, I'm sure that that's the case.
So would you encourage any of your children to sign up for this kind of a dating site?
I have one daughter, but you're asking, would I encourage my boys to sign up for this site? Probably not. Probably not. But at the same time, I probably wouldn't encourage them to sign up for a lot of the sites. But that's just because they tend to be guys who are a little bit cynical about those. I'm not necessarily cynical. I think it's great if people meet each other online. Just not at Dominion dating.
Yeah, it really ruffled some feathers.
I bet.
It's got some kind of low quality videos that look like they were shot in old youth rooms in the basements of churches.
Yes, of course they are.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I just thought
that's by the way where you're going to live if you make it there, these guys.
I just thought that was funny. Wanted to talk about
13 kids and they're all homeschooled.
And then you have a youth room in your own basement.
That's right.
Completely unrelated. There was a Japanese town that spent $200,000 on a 43-foot tall squid statue.
And why not?
Well, they were using some of their COVID relief money to boost their tourism industry again.
I love the COVID relief money. That is so great. That is great. Can you imagine the city council getting together? What do we spend this on? A squid statue.
43 feet long.
Yeah. That's the best idea I've heard all day. Let's do it.
So if you had $200,000 to use as you're leaving Northview,
what would I buy?
What would you build a statue of?
Ooh, what would I build a statue of? That's a good question. I probably would build a statue of myself. No, I would build a statue of Ezra.
Made out of what material?
Made out of marble. No, I don't know what I'd build. $200,000. That's a nice statue of squid.
It is a very nice looking squid
statue. Do we
statue.
know why they did squid? Why did a squid?
They're a coastal town, and squid fishing is a big part of their economy. And
so this is no different, basically, than Abbotsford putting a raspberry statue at the south end of Clearbrook Road, right?
Yes, I was actually going to ask you about that. Yeah. What your favorite?
It's the same thing, though, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, same idea. Which we also made fun of Abbotsford, so I think it's only fair to make fun of the squid one.
But the tax dollars at work, that Abbotsford raspberry thing. But a squid would be more fun.
That's true. A little bit too big to go in the middle of our roundabout, though.
No, it's true.
Okay, that was all I wanted to talk about.
Wow, this was great. No, I appreciate that.
This is what Fridays are for.
Yeah, I have spent something. You asked me ahead of time. I have spent some money on something that I have regretted before.
Yes.
So as good a segue as that is.
Yeah.
So when I was in college, I sold my car, which was a very useful thing to get around. I sold it for a massive stereo. And at the time, my father was like, "Are you crazy?" And I was like, "No, I want to listen to loud music." And I wanted the guys on my floor to think I was amazing by having this massive stereo. And so I did. And after about a year, I thought, this stereo is not as helpful as the car was.
Right, which also had a stereo in it?
Yeah, small one, but I was like, yeah. So anyway, I've given I ended up selling that stereo to my brother-in-law.
For his car?
No, it was, I took a big hit. Let's just say that. But the stereo was very expensive. It was seriously, it was almost an even trade. So you can imagine how nice a stereo this was.
Yeah, especially if it was a serviceable car that you sold.
So very serviceable. Yeah. It was actually a great car, but I don't know. Stupid.
This has been Financial Advice with Jeff Bucknam. We're going to go now into the interview he did with Andy Steiger, where they talk about apologetics, looking forward to what the future holds. Really interesting stuff that we think you'll really benefit from.
Well, here I am with Andrew Cash Money Steiger. Andy Steiger, the reason I'm speaking so kindly and jovially about him is that Andy and I, we worked together at Northview for, 8 years?
8 years?
8 years, something like that, 8 years. And Andy then just picked up and left in a huff. He took off and he was very angry. Andy, why did you leave me? Why did you leave me behind? And
Jeff, after the announcement you gave this week, I feel like asking you the same question. Why have you left me, Jeff?
Buddy, how are things going? The reason Andy left is because he wanted to spend more of his time on Apologetics Canada. He had completed his PhD, but I want to find out about that. You have completed it yet, or?
Yeah, there's so much to talk about. Okay. I'll start with Apologetics Canada because, Jeff, you took a risk on me. I don't know if you remember this. This was a humble moment when I first met Jeff. For whatever reason, I can't remember why, but the time that I came to Northview to have a lunch with you, I had my mother's minivan. Do you remember that?
I do remember it. I remember that minivan.
Mm-hmm. and my mom had like 5 dogs at that time, so it was full of dog hair. I can't even remember why I had it, but I did. And I remember thinking, I sure hope Jeff has a car and he'll drive to lunch. And of course, you were riding your bike at that point. I think you've pretty much given up on that now, but
it's not true. I still ride my bike. I just don't do it to church and back. But yes, I used to commute on my bike, and we had to ride in your dog-infested minivan.
And yet you still hired me. But to the point is, even with the minivan experience, I was running Apologetics Canada at the time, and we tried something that I had never seen done before. with me running Apologetics Canada and running the Young Adults Ministry simultaneously. And the long story short, the reason I ended up leaving Northview was because that little experiment was successful. You know, the Young Adults Ministry flourished and Apologetics Canada flourished. And I came to this place where I realized that it was just no longer possible to do both.
Yeah. So you focused your time on Apologetics Canada in the last little while. Can you give us an update regarding what's going on with Apologetics Canada before I start asking all sorts of questions about culture and stuff like that?
Yeah. So when I started, with Apologetics Canada, and just kind of asking God, you know, what do you want from me in this ministry? And as you mentioned, feeling God calling me to do my PhD, which I have finished. I'm in the last stages with Aberdeen University, which oddly enough, Jeff, you'll appreciate this. Instead of me asking for an extension, the university asked me for an extension that I needed to sign on there for them because of COVID, they've just been running behind. So I should be completely done, but because they've been backlogged, I'm waiting for the completion. But with regards to Apologetics Canada, things have been going great. So, listen, it was not my choice to leave Northview in the middle of a pandemic and to go back into Apologetics Canada full time, because a lot of people don't realize I gave my notice a year out, so that we had time to transition Apologetics Canada out, and we had time to find my replacement, and then during that time we have a pandemic. And I remember thinking, Jeff, I think you'll appreciate this. When I started Apologetics Canada, I started that ministry in the recession that had taken place. You know, that had taken place in 2008, and we started Apologetics Canada in 2010, which it was still not good financial times. And I remember thinking to myself, Lord, I'm gonna trust you in this. And I'm gonna show you that I'm gonna be faithful. And then I figured, and that's it. I'm done. I've showed my faith. Like, here we go, right? And then now I'm like, I leave Northview and I'm right into a pandemic leading Apologetics Canada and thinking, Lord, I thought we were done with this faith thing.
Yeah, and everybody's got so much money that they're willing to share with charities. So, yeah. Isn't it funny, though? The Lord Stowe has been really faithful to Apologetics Canada over the last number of years.
It has.
Andy, I am really interested,
and we're doing amazing, by the way. We're doing really well.
If you're interested in knowing more about Apologetics Canada, I'm just going to give you the website right up. It's apologeticscanada.ca. Yes? Com?
Yep. .ca or .com, either or.
Yeah. And you can find out all the stuff that they've been doing recently through the pandemic and some of the plans that they have going forward. Andy has published 2 books? 1 book. 2 books now.
2 books and 2 children's books.
Yeah. So you can find him. You just Google Andy Steiger. You will find some of that stuff, and especially on Amazon. You're selling it everywhere, though, right? I mean, basically the books are being sold everywhere. His most recent one is really good. It's about
everywhere where books are sold.
It's about zombies, actually. Not really. It's about. Well, why don't you tell them what it's about?
Yeah, it's on the topic of dehumanization, but from an academic standpoint, you would say, oh, it's theological anthropology, which is basically what does it mean to be human from a Christian perspective? What does that cash out as with regards to our value, how we live our lives, and even just the nature of who we are, which I think, and you and I've talked a lot about this, and I think we still agree, like this is a key question of our time.
Huge. Yeah, it's the question actually that gets into the SOGI curriculum and the questions about gender that we're facing, and even I think even the pandemic actually assumes certain anthropologies, right? I mean, it assumes the importance of the physical over over the spiritual. So anyway, but Andy's book is really good. It's fantastic. Highly recommend it. You could sit down and read it. Andy, tell me, I'm interested though. You've been doing apologetics for quite a while, and what are the big issues that you're facing now in apologetics in Canada? Apologetics, by the way, for those who are kind of new to the idea, the word means an argument for the faith, basically. So what are the issues that you have to overcome when you're talking to people about Christianity in the Canadian landscape these days. And my question is, how has that changed over the last number of years? How would you have answered that question, like 5 years ago or 10 years ago? And is it different?
Yeah, it's interesting isn't it, to see how that question's changed. And I'm sure you've got your own opinions on this, Jeff, given what you did your doctoral research in with young adults. Because I remember when you and I first met, you were just finishing your research, and at that time, that was, it was fairly new with Apologetics Canada. I'd been doing it for about 3 years at that point, and the questions that people were coming at, the church with, coming to church with, sort of thing, were very simple in some regards, because they were just like, hey, I'm being asked this question. Does it have an answer? And if it does have an answer, what is that answer? And there was just a need at that point to really show that the church has a robust intellectual tradition of deep thinkers, that's still the case, and that there are great answers for the questions that are going on. However, as time has gone on, what I have seen, Jeff, is that the questions haven't changed. The questions haven't changed so much as how you answer the questions, I've noticed, has really changed.
So name some of the questions that you commonly get in the Canadian landscape when it comes to the faith, the objections that people have to Christianity.
Well, this is kind of interesting, because when I wrote the book Thinking, which you mocked me mercilessly on that.
I mock you mercilessly about everything, though, Andy. Let's just be fair.
And this reminds me of old times here of the podcast we used to do with Northview, and those who've listened to it know the mocking that I received. But anyway, in that book, I deal with 5, of the big questions that I was receiving on a regular basis. So, what's the meaning of life? Does God exist? Do all religions lead to God? Why is there evil? And is there life after death? Now, interestingly enough, when I first wrote that book, if you were to ask me what was the biggest question, I would have said, why is there evil? And at the end of the day, I mean, that's always been a major question for human beings. However, I do find it interesting, kind of as time has gone on, that I would say now the question, each decade or so kind of seems to highlight one of those questions over the others. And I would say right now we are really in a phase that's highlighting the question of meaning.
So what kind of question about meaning? Why am I here? What's going on? Is there any purpose in life? That kind of meaning?
Yeah, I think that the question of meaning on that larger, that large scale of what am I doing here? Does my life have any purpose? Where am I going? What's going to lead to the best kind of life sort of mentality? Because you would think that Canada is getting more secular, but that's not necessarily the case. The amount of New Age thinking is really staggering to see how that's really growing. And I was kind of shocked when I started my PhD at Aberdeen, which is in Scotland, because my first day on campus there, when I came to campus, there was this huge bazaar, and it was a crystal bazaar. They were selling crystals, and so that you can tap into your chakra or whatever. That kind of new agey thinking is prevalent there, but it's prevalent here as well. So it's one of those moments where you're like, we think Canada's secular, but it's not actually as secular as you'd think it is.
No, it's spiritually in that sense. I don't think there's a lot of people around these days who would just flat deny that there's a spiritual or non-physical side to us. But yeah, I agree. The New Age, or the cobbling together of some sort of kind of your own personal religious tradition is kind of amazing how many people would hold to something like that. But it's always something that works for me personally, and it assumes the truth of all the different viewpoints, basically. Like, you do you just have the viewpoint that you have, and let's not judge or think about anybody. It's the coexist bumper sticker type of thing.
I think that's absolutely right. And so what works for you is kind of your truth sort of thing.
So Andy, if I were a skeptic and I were saying to you, man, I'm just looking for meaning and I'm looking for that kind of stuff, can you give me an argument for the Christian faith on why it's better or more valuable, or how is it better than the cobbling together of my own little spiritual stuff?
Oh, that's interesting. Kind of, because we have two things that are going on with a question like that. On the secular viewpoint, where you take God out of the equation entirely, you're left with this sort of meaning that is meaningless. Like there is no big picture to the world. The world is only the small picture. Everything reduces to the parts that the world's made of and the physical laws those parts follow. But I kind of can't help but wonder, Jeff, if the reason why the New Age thinking is as popular as it is really a reaction to that. That there's this kind of longing going, nah, I don't buy that. I don't think that the world's that simplistic or reductionistic. And so I think an important argument for us as we're helping to speak into that world that's looking for the big picture is to help people to see that we're not discrediting the parts that the world is made of, but what we're saying, and here's the argument, that there's a difference between the parts that a thing is made of and the purposeful whole that a thing is made for. And I think this is an important aspect of Christianity that's gone unaddressed. I mean, that the Christian worldview isn't discrediting the parts. They're just saying the world is more than the parts, and that God has a cosmic purpose, if you will, that God is doing. And so my question that I'm asking as a follower of Jesus and that I want to share with other people is, what is that purpose, and what happens to our lives when we step into that purpose? Which, as you've heard me talk many times, I always point people to Jesus on this, where Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. This idea of community. You were created for relationship with God, relationship with one another.
Yeah. Andy, do you think that there's a difference between the way the people in Canada think these days and the U.S.? Like if you're doing apologetics in the United States, are there unique things that are different, not about the U.S., but about Canada? Because you're an American, you're from Portland, and so you've come to Canada, married a Canadian girl, and you've kind of done it on both sides of the border. And I'm just wondering if there's a difference in Canada.
There is a huge difference between doing, I'd say, ministry in general, but apologetics for sure, in Canada versus the United States. And I can give you there's interesting cultural differences. A fun one for me, this was a fun learning experience, and Jeff, I'm sure you've had your own as you realize the differences and the nuances. One of the first times in Canada when I preached on a memorial service, like in the United States, Remembrance Day is a big deal. The United States is a culture that is driven forward by looking in the past. And so going to school in the United States, you will be steeped in the history and tradition of the United States. And that forms part of your identity. Here in Canada, you don't have that as much. And in fact, what you have is a very interesting blend of a lot of different cultures, such that I'm giving a sermon on Remembrance Day, which, by the way, was in a Mennonite church where that has its own.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, there's different flavors of pacifism within Mennonite culture, which is interesting. That church was quite on the pacifist scale. I didn't realize that till later. But one of the other interesting parts is just very, naturally, and without even thinking about it, I was talking about the Germans and talking about, what the Nazis did and that sort of thing. And I remember somebody came up to me after the service and said, hey, Andy, just so you're aware, I think that there were at least 3 gentlemen that fought for the Germans in World War II in the service. And I was taken aback, right? Because it was one of those culture shock moments for me here in Canada, that it is so much more of a cultural mix than you have in the United States. You'd never have that in the U.S.
No, you probably
At least
wouldn't.
I don't.
And if they
I don't wanna
said
say
that,
never, but that would be so rare.
well, if they said that, you know, nobody would ever say it out loud. They would hide all that information.
Yes.
An awful lot.
Is
Is it harder in the U.S. than here, or do you think that it's, when I say harder, is it more difficult to persuade somebody of faith in Christ here or there?
Here, I'll say something that I'm curious how you're going to respond to this. In some ways, I find doing apologetic work in the United States can be more challenging because in the United States, I find that faith and politics are so intermixed that to make a faith claim it can be very easy to make a political claim.
Well, that seems to be what's going on now. Yeah, that people equate them. So if I'm saying hey, you should consider Jesus, in people's minds they're thinking, oh, Republican, I should be a Republican. Yeah, which of course is not the case at all, and you're not saying that when you say it, but you have to disentangle that.
Which I think is a real challenge.
But you don't have to do that here.
You don't have to do that here as much. And here's something I'm going to say, Jeff, and I want to know how you would respond to this. I can't help but think that this is part of the strength of Canada, is that there are multiple political organizations or groups that have enough, sway that they're an actual, party. Whereas in the United States, you're polarized between two. And I think that creates challenges.
Well, it creates an us and them attitude. When you have 3 or 4, it's not us and them. The Canadian political system basically means that parties have to get along or to make a government and to make it function. And so, if you talk to Christians around the place, it's not uncommon for somebody to say, "Hey, I'm a member. I'm a Green Party. I vote for the Green Party." And other people would say, "No, I believe." In the Liberals, and others look, no, I'm conservative, and so and NDP, and you get people all over,
and then a mix of all
the
that.
max, and some of them are in the small parties that they're into, but there's no one group that people would say, oh, most Christians are in that one. Whereas in the States, that's exactly the case. And I actually think ministry in the U.S. now, because it's so entangled with politics, and the politics of the U.S. is so inflammatory, I think you're absolutely right, that it creates a really, really difficult challenge because you have to explain to everybody, I'm not talking to you about politics here. I'm talking to you about other deeper issues than that. But in Canada, I think most people would think, Andy, that traditionally, people in Canada be like, well, we're way harder, it's of a harder ground or more difficult to reach people in Canada. But do you think that that's the case, or do you think people in Canada are largely open to the gospel and just there are just some unique challenges?
I find that it's interesting. I don't find that that's the case. I find that Canada is quite open to the gospel. Canada, of course, is very secular in its thinking or in its ideology, the way that it works. However, doesn't necessarily mean everybody is secular in their thinking, but they're within at least a system that's quite secular. But here's something, though, that I would really push back on these days. There once was a time, Jeff, that people would say that, hey, if you want to know where the future's going, look to Canada or Europe sort of thing. And we were kind of really seen as this is the direction secularism's going. I can't help but say that has changed. And I can't help but feel like the United States has really kind of taken the lead in some regards with the direction things are going. And I wouldn't mind hearing your thoughts on that. Plus, I'll drop a little bomb on that in just a moment.
Yeah, I think secularism has had an effect in Europe, down under Australia, New Zealand, and in Canada, and certainly a little bit in the U.S. The U.S. seems like a unique situation, though, from my point of view, in that because it's so historically Christian or religious, and doesn't want to drop that. And when I've lived in the States a lot, grew up there, spent a lot of time, but there's still a spiritual emphasis, even in what many people think are secular cities. It's not really common for you to find somebody who's like a hard secularist who just thinks, they read Richard Dawkins all the time and they're like, no, science, science, science. So in the States, I think that I think it's gone a different direction. I think the U.S. kind of is, charting its own path a little bit.
I agree.
There was a philosopher once who said that the challenge with the United States is it's basically an India ruled by a Sweden. And I think that's fun because Sweden is historically, really secular and largely godless in that sense. But India has got, everybody's religious. So anyway, it's, I think the U.S. is charting its own path, and I think the ministry there is particularly challenging because of that. And you have to disentangle different things there than you have to in Canada. What's your bomb?
Here's my bomb then. I'm going to drop this, and then I want to see how you think about this.
Hit it.
Because here's the thing. A lot of people think, because of what we just said here, that, the United States, the problem there must be political. And I would say, I don't think it is. I can't help but place the majority of the blame of what is going on in the United States, as one American to another, at the feet of media. I think the United States has a propaganda problem.
Wow. Look at you. Yeah, you know what? Yeah, and there's a whole discussion in there, right? Because the media it's a for-profit organization, and so they're trying to figure out what sells.
It is a clickbait world.
And conflict does. Conflict always sells more than, if I publish an article saying, look at these two people who different viewpoints and they get along. Some people will be like, oh, that's a lovely human interest story, but it doesn't drive the passions quite like, look at these two people who hate each other. And do you see what I mean? So you can understand kind of the highlighting of racial challenges in the U.S. just based upon that kind of business, that kind of business plan for a media agency, because they're like, oh, we should totally talk about racial discrepancies and issues, because the more we make of that, the more people are going to get their passions inflamed, and then they're going to want to click more and read more about our stuff. And you can see the political or the media groups like CNN or MSNBC going in a very liberal direction, further and further toward that tribe, and Fox News going further and further toward the conservative. And so everybody's kind of creating their own little group. And that's the challenge for Christians, is that I know a lot of Christians kind of feel like they sit in the middle of it. I know there are a lot of Christians who are like, no, I'm a super conservative. But most of us that I know are kind of in the middle, and we're like, well, I want to reach people for Jesus, whether or not they drive a pickup truck in Alabama or they drive a Mercedes-Benz in New York City. I want to reach them for Jesus, and it's very difficult to do it when you have such a dichotomy and us and them kind of attitude. And I thank God that Canada's not in that kind of situation. I think it creates some open doors that perhaps we don't recognize as much.
I completely agree, and I think that this is a real challenge too. I don't want to pretend like I think that this has some simple solutions, because I was talking about it with my wife the other day. I was like, man, Nance, like I don't see easy ways around what's going on. I mean, there once was a day you got a newspaper, and they had the opportunity to give you the front page sort of thing. Now these days we kind of like got two front pages going on as they try to work the sale as much as possible. Do you know what I mean? But we're in this clickbait culture where they're trying to get our attention. And then you could say, oh, well, what we need to do is what? Like the government's supposed to fund the media, and then that's going to lead to good things? It's like, well, of course, that's not going to be any good. But
oh, Andy, the government does everything well. Don't you know that?
But what you need at the end of the day is people, though, that are willing to look for truth, right? But it's so easy and tempting to just want to fall into your whatever echo chamber scratches your it.
Right, and I think that's my point, is the media is pushing into those echo chambers more and more, so that those who are kind of left in the middle and want to have that open dialogue, and especially Christians, because they want the gospel is the good news. So that's the news they want to trumpet. There's getting less and less a hearing among many for it. And by the way, I would never suggest that there are lots and lots of the Christians are all in the conservative side of things. And I actually think that, there are many people who are conservative who've kind of married together American nationalism with Christianity. And I think that that's syncretism, right? That's godlessness as much as the secularists on the other side of things. And so everybody needs to hear the gospel. It's just getting harder and harder and harder to preach it when you sit in the middle and you're trying to talk to both sides.
Think about this too, Jeff, because like you studied under J.P. Moreland. And one of the things J.P., he's a great philosopher for those who don't know him, out at Talbot. But he talked a lot about culture war, right? Like there's a war of worldviews that are going on. And we always understood that very simply that, okay, we've got, the Christians over here, and we've got the secularists over here, and our worldviews are at odds with one another. But the problem more and more, Jeff, as I see it, it's a real challenge for ministry, is that culture war is coming to the church. That war of worldviews is dividing us from the inside. And I think that's a real turn in this battle that I think is quite concerning.
So, Andy, when you look at the future of Christianity in let's say North America, but particularly in Canada, put your futurist hat on. What do you think that the church is going to have to face in terms of its interaction with the culture at large in the days ahead? Or maybe how that seeped into relationships between people in the church? Like what... If you look, and you're standing up on the watchtower and you're looking off into the distance, what are the challenges you see coming?
Like when I pull out the apologetics crystal ball and take a look, which by the way doesn't work very well, because we had the Apologetics Canada conference, and if you remember, Jeff, like just a couple days later, the whole world shut down.
No, you guys were the super spreader. You were the Canadian super spreader.
We did it. But the amusing part is the theme that year was, the future. Where are things going? And I can tell you right now, COVID wasn't on the agenda. So the crystal ball hasn't been very accurate. However, one of the things I talked about in that, and it's something I still hold to, but I think it's changing in unique ways, and that is community, relationship. And one of the effects of sin, of evil, that people really have lost sight of in some ways, and I think the church needs to help remind people that sin is this relational separation. It is separating you from God. It's separating you from one another. I think C.S. Lewis got it right when he called it the Great Divorce. You've got the great divorce between you and God, and you got a lot of little divorces between you and people. And I think that that's the human problem. We come into the world, we're born into the world with a bent towards breaking relationship, and we're horrible at reconciling relationship. We don't, right? And this is the gospel message, right? That what you can't do, God did in your place, and restored you to relationship with himself and to one another. And so, normally when we would preach something like that or think about that, or when I would talk about the future, I would be thinking about, secular culture and the ways in which people are divorcing themselves from one another in a multiplicity of ways. And so you could talk about that in all sorts of ways. But man, I can't, one of the things that saddens me is how that's creeping into the church, and how I fear that a future in which the church is becoming divided. And I can't help but think, Jeff, I don't know what scripture comes to your mind, but Ephesians chapter 2 comes to my mind, when Paul is saying, Jesus broke down the walls of hostility, and what did he preach?
Yeah.
He preached peace to you who were far off.
Yeah, to those who are near and those who are far off.
Yeah, it gets me fired up, man.
Yeah, and one of the first effects that the gospel has is the unity and the peace that it develops between people who should normally be at odds, right? Jew and Gentile. And unfortunately, the church does not at all look that way, at all. In fact, the more and more you look at it, especially online and the way it's being presented, there are more and more people fighting with each other and arguing about, which, doctrine matters, but fighting and arguing and disagreeing and not having this ability, you're right, to reconcile. We struggle with reconciliation, and the church should be showing a different way. I absolutely agree. Loneliness is a huge deal too, and I think you've mentioned that before too. Is how the culture right now and the way that the way that things are running. I even think about the staying home and all that. Like loneliness is an issue. Every business in the world started to change their attitude, saying, "Oh, maybe we don't need an office. We'll just have Zoom for everybody." And I don't know, man. I just think people, like you said before, they're made for each other, and not just like faces on a screen. They're made for physical, like communion type of like togetherness.
Yeah, relationship, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Like, because that's one of the sad parts with it, isn't it? Like, listen, I had somebody back, like last year, sort of thing. Where people could hang out in my hot tub, and as you know, like a lot of ministry happens in the Steiger hot tub. But I mean, I had a guy over, and I was talking with, and his wife had a miscarriage, and I mean, he was just weeping in my hot tub, talking through it, right? And I remember thinking to myself, this is what it means to be human. Like this is the kind of relationship we're called to. It's not always going to be, a roller coaster, like some sort of amusement park where it's always joy or whatever. I mean, we need each other as we walk through the good and the bad with one another, and that when we do that, isn't just good for the guy in my hot tub, but it's also actually good for me. Like that I need this. Man, there's so much I could say on that. I'll just pause there.
Yeah. Andy, I mean, I'm looking at our time, and it looks like we might be pretty close to out of it. I want to know what your plans are going forward for Apologetics Canada. What can we expect to see in the days ahead that we can follow and even hear more about some of the stuff that you've been talking about here and the humanization type stuff and what? Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, with regards to the future of Apologetics Canada, I would just ask people to be in prayer with us as we kind of just continue to follow the Lord's lead. When I was at Northview and I was completing my PhD, I really felt like I was just holding back the reins, saying, God, like, I can't let this organization grow because I've got these, X, Y, and Z that I got to take care of. But having stepped fully back into Apologetics Canada, God has just been growing this ministry because the need's so huge. And so that's kind of overwhelming for me sometimes because I'm like, okay, Apologetics Canada can't grow too fast. And B, I'm like, I want to help, but you can't help everywhere. So how do we help? And then, Jeff, here's the big prayer request. For those who've been following the whole Ravi scandal, one of the major organizations that we used to work with and that was doing great work here in Canada has imploded. They will be shutting their doors at the end of May. And
So what Andy's referring to is Ravi Zacharias and what's called RZIM, right? Ravi Zacharias International Ministries has faced a massive implosion because Ravi Zacharias, after his death, was shown to have committed some significant sexual misconduct in many areas, and it's really like really cratered a lot of the ministry because this guy who was so effective in apologetics is all of a sudden seen as being, in many cases, like a predator, and so I'm assuming that's affected the apologetics world.
It has, and it goes back to what I said to you, where questions haven't changed, but how you address them has changed. That there's even more need these days for a counseling type of response than this academic, answer. People are looking for more of a relational understanding, but also there is also this sniffing out. Like, are you real, or are you two-faced? Are you saying one thing but living something totally different? Sort of idea.
Right. So in the days ahead, you guys are, I'm assuming, charting some courses. I mean, it's hard because you used to do a conference, which is like the totally off the table for the next at least
we plan
while.
On doing it again for those who are wondering in March. So next March we will have the next conference. We've been doing smaller online stuff for now, but here's something that's on the table, Jeff, that people will start to see, and that is that there was some events or ministries that RZM Canada were doing that we think were good and effective, and we're going to be trying our best to step into the need that's here in Canada. So one of the ways that we're growing is we have, it's all kind of happening right now, so people just need to follow with us, but we're starting up an Eastern branch in Ontario. And we're going to be poised to be able to serve Canada better. But this is also another one of those moments, Jeff, where people start to sniff out with like, oh man, is Apologetics Canada trying to empire build? Like what's going on here?
Mm-hmm.
And I hope people.
And the answer is, of course. Of course you are.
If it's the kingdom of God, we're trying to empire build. But I hope that people hear my heart. Like, we want to step into the need, which is great here in Canada. And sadly, right now, Jeff, there's very few people doing this ministry. There's a need for more.
Yeah. Andy, thank you so much for spending some time with me. Now, I always let the person who comes on, I actually ask them to ask me a question. You've asked a few, but you have a question at the end here.
Well, I have a couple, so we'll see how many I can get to.
Oh, what is this? You guys I give an inch.
Okay, so first of all,
okay, go for it.
We started this conversation with you asking why I left you. So, Jeff, why are you leaving me?
Andy,
for those who have been hurt, by the way,
probably both of us.
Jeff,
you can tell.
Shared on social media that he has resigned.
Or is resigning. Yeah.
When will be your last day?
I think late June. I will be moving in July. Andy, the reason that I am leaving has nothing to do with Northview, and has everything to do with the place I'm going, and how difficult the situation is that I'm going to. I am weirdly wired in that if you put me in a situation where I am asked to manage a thing that's going really well, I have this like inside of me, I start looking for ways to blow it up just so we can rebuild it again, because I think it's more fun to rebuild. I know it's horrible. So I have found myself at Northview over the last little while looking around and thinking, wow, God has done such a cool thing here. But the next number of years would basically require me to be doing something that is really not up my alley in terms of the management and stuff. And yes, there are things that we could press forward, but my role in the pressing forward would not be quite what I would want to do. And more importantly, there are these churches around, some significant churches around the world that have had huge issues. And Lord has always used me in kind of turnaround situations, or used me in situations where I just hopefully can go and bring some level of renewal. I'm praying that the Lord would do that. So in the end, it's really focused on the mission and what I'm going to, not what I'm going from. We're going to miss Northview a lot. But our reasons are the same, basically, Andy. You went forward because you were like, look, the mission of God requires me to invest more time in Apologetics Canada. And my thought is, the mission of God requires me to take what I've learned at Northview and be able to apply it in another setting where maybe we can bring about the same kind of thing by God's grace.
One thing I've always appreciated about you is that when I first started at Northview, I don't know if you remember this, but we were in Thailand together on a missions trip.
Were we ever?
Which that's a whole nother story. But one of the things you said to me really caught my attention. You said you basically shared that you knew you weren't going to be at Northview forever, and that you would be at Northview as the Lord led, and were ready to go where He would lead you next. And I remember being so encouraged by that, where some people, they get into ministry and it's about a job, it's about paying the bills sort of thing or whatever. But I could tell immediately for you, this is ministry, and I will go as the Lord leads and for as long as He leads.
Yeah. My intention certainly was to stay as long as I was needed here. I just think that the strength of the team and the staff and the elders and stuff, like, honestly, the church is in a great spot.
Let me ask my other question real quick. One more.
Okay, go.
Imagine that I build a time machine, and I put you in this time machine, and I send it back to when you first started at Northview, and you could tell yourself, two things. Okay, so here's the first one. You could tell yourself the winning lottery ticket. By the way, would you? Secondly, you could give yourself some ministry advice.
I would give the ministry advice mostly because, money is whatever.
But what would the ministry advice be?
My ministry advice to myself would be 34-year-old Jeff. You denigrate what God is doing in your life and in your ministry when you don't believe in what he's doing in your life and in your ministry. That, in other words, that there is a kind of false humility, and it's not false. It is a humility. It's a, man, I'm a nobody and I shouldn't be in. Yes, that's absolutely true. Everybody's a nobody. But I do think that, I'm a nobody who the Lord has gifted in certain ways. And so many times I would not walk in the calling that I think I had received with the kind of boldness and joy that comes from that, knowing that, hey man, I'm a nobody, but God has gifted me to speak into the lives of people and gifted me to help turn around churches. And I should just recognize that it's not my gift, it's God's gift. So I should just go for it, right? Instead of just always kind of apologizing for it, go for it and see if it can happen in a gentler way. That's the other thing I would tell myself, is that there's like you've said before, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. So there's a lot of things I'd tell myself. Oh my gosh. Yeah. But yeah, I'm hoping that in the next step of my ministry life, I'm able to put some of that into practice, and I'll make other errors as well, so that when I'm 70, I'll look back, Lord willing, I'll look back and say, wow, I've been basically an idiot this whole time, but the Lord, by his grace, has made things grow, which I'm sure is your view as well.
Yes.
Hey, Andy, thank you so much. You're a superstar. Always like talking to you. I would love to see you more often, but we can't because of the rules. Anyway, God bless you. You guys can pray for Andy again, apologeticscanada.ca or .com, and you can get all their information there. Andy, final word?
Thank you for having me. Much love.
Okay, buddy. Take care, and we'll talk to the rest of you later. Thanks for listening to Conversations with Jeff. Make sure you subscribe to catch up on all upcoming episodes. So until next time, love God, do what you want, and don't be stupid.